Hi, welcome back to Newspaper Article Lucky Dip, our random collection of newspaper articles that didn't make it into research projects, but were interesting enough to save for a later time, and that time is now. So we'll get into episode 2. Again, there are no trigger warnings. I don't know what articles are going to be pulled out the hat today. If you want to double check and make sure that there's nothing triggering for you, have a wee look in the description below to find out what we're about to read. Because I have no idea. We don't know until the end just how devastating the articles have been. So, last one was quite good. The last one was very upbeat. It seemed like it was on a theme of marriage, fairly coincidentally. So we'll see what Evie's hat has for us today. Okay. So it's good because even if I look in, they're all folded, I can't see them, but the newspaper titles and dates don't really give me a hint as to what's going to be revealed in them, so it's as much of a surprise to myself as it is to you guys. So, to begin with, we have an article from the Perthshire Courier for the 19th of April 1822. Alright, so we'll see what this one has for us. So this is actually an article that did make it into one of our projects. It was for an Independence Live video, Gender Fluidity in Scottish History. We'll get into this, it's a wee bit of a longer article. We mentioned in our last a female who had been working as a plasterer like a man. The following is a more detailed account of that eccentric character. She belongs originally to Saltcoats, is about 27 years of age, and for better than 4 years she has, of her own free choice, worn the attire and discharged the laborious duties of one of the male sex. Her real name is Helen Oliver, but she has assumed that of her brother John. About 6 years ago, while she was a maidservant in a farmhouse in West Kilbride, a particular intimacy took place between her and a person in a neighbouring house, who officiated as ploughman. Being frequently seen walking together in quiet and sequestered places, they were regarded as lovers. Ultimately, however, this ploughman turned out also to be female, and it's believed by Helen's relatives and acquaintances that it was the arguments of this personage which induced her to abandon the female dress and duties. Upon Sunday the 4th of July 1818, while in her parents' house at Saltcoats, she requested her to give her wee cutty pipe, and she would give her 2 new ones in exchange. To this unusual demand, the mother, after some questions, consented, and Helen immediately afterwards began to write a letter, which, in answer to an inquiry from her parent, she said was to inform the people in Greenock, to whom she was hired as a servant, that she would not be with them for some time, for several reasons she then alleged. Early on the following morning, Helen helped herself to a complete suite of her brother's clothes and disappeared, without giving the least intimation of her future prospects, or where she intended to fix her residence. Dressed in her new attire, she reached the house of a cousin in Glasgow on the same day. Her relative was not sufficiently intimate with the person of the fair impostor to detect the fraud, never doubting in the least that she was the real John Oliver. Among other inquiries for her absent relatives, Sister Helen was not forgotten. A plasterer stopped at the time in her cousin's house, and she resolved to learn that business. Accordingly, she went for trial to a person in the Calton, but having fallen out with her master, she left the town. She then went to Paisley, where she wrought for about 3 months, and she was next employed for about half a year in Johnston. There, either for amusement or to prevent suspicion, and ensure concealment, she courted a young woman, and absolutely carried the joke so far as to induce the girl to leave her service to be married. Travelling one night between Johnston and Paisley, she was accosted by a lad from Saltcoats who was intimate with her person, parents, and history, and in consequence she removed to Kilmarnock, where she remained for 6 months. Besides the places already mentioned, she has been in Lanark and Edinburgh, working always at the plaistering, except a short time she was employed by a Glasgow flesher about the Bell Street market. A variety of circumstances have frequently impelled this rustic Daon to change not only her master and house of residence, but also the town in which she was comfortably employed, particularly as she was often, or rather always, obliged to board and share her lodgings with some neighbourhood workmen, and though for obvious reasons she seldom detailed more of her previous history than mentioned the town she had visited and the masters she had served, yet some sagacious females have been known to declare that Johnny must have been either a soger or a sailor, because when he likes himsel, he can brawly clout his breeks, darn his stockings, roke his ain meat, and wash his ain claes. At the beginning of February last, Helen applied for employment to a master plaisterer in Hutchison Town. She said she was 17 years of age and stated that she and a sister were left orphans at an early age, urged her forlorn condition, and that having already some practice, she was very anxious to be bound an apprentice, that she might obtain an ample knowledge of the business. Eventually she was employed, and though she had the appearance of a little man, she was in reality a tall woman, being about 5 feet 4 inches high, by no means shy of a lift. Times without number she has carried the heavy hod full of lime for the Irish labourer in attendance. Steady, diligent, and quiet, she gave her master every satisfaction, and he, considering her a rather delicate boy, feelingly kept her at light ornamental work, and paid her 7 shillings a week. Some time since a workman was employed by the same master, to whom Helen was intimately known. The master, having learned the facts of the case, placed her apart at work from the men, and took a favourable opportunity to speak with her. She indignantly denied her metamorphoses, offered to produce letters from her sister, declared that she was a Freemason, and besides had been a flesher, a drummer in the Greenock Volunteers, and made a number of statements with a view to escape detection. Last week an Irishman with characteristic confidence sprang upon the heroine, hugged her like her brother Brune, and cried in his genuine Doric, "Johnny, they tell me you're a woman, and dang it, I mean to know, for I love a pretty girl." The agile female extracted herself in an instant, and with a powerful kick drove him from her, at the same time exclaiming, with an oath, she would soon convince him she was not a woman. Ultimately, however, the truth was wrung from her, and she has consequently left the town. She writes a good hand, and previous to her departure she addressed a card to her master, in which she bade him farewell, and requested him not to make much talk about H. Oliver. And that's from the Glasgow Chronicle, related in the Perthshire Courier for the 19th of April, 1822. Men's work paid better. And doing that project for the gender fluidity in Scottish history was a real eye-opener. There were women who made it to the position of captains of infantries, who had quite an exemplary career as grenadiers. There were women who were really held in very high esteem in the armies that they served in, until they were injured in some way that meant that all was revealed. And in those cases, they tended to be let go in a very quiet manner. There was one woman who had made it to, I believe, a captaincy, and she was let go with half pension, which was probably the best that she could have hoped for, because I think it was that or a court-martial, but again they would have wanted to have kept it very quiet, that they had a woman in charge of their men for X amount of time. Less often you would find men in women's roles, because women's work didn't pay so well. It really was a means to an end for the women, but a lot of them would take female lovers. And there were an old couple who had run a pub, and on the wife's deathbed, she laid all bare that her husband was her wife, and she took over the brewery, the pub afterwards. But there wasn't the huge outcry that you might have expected when these things were found out. It was more of a, oh my goodness, did you hear? But it wasn't really lambasted in the way you might have expected. Should we see what the next article has for us? Let's have a wheel look, shall we? The Montrose Standard for the 24th of June, 1853. Can we see what this has? Okay, this is a good one since we're coming up for Hallowe'en, I guess. We have an article entitled Table Turning. This mysterious phenomenon, which, along with the rappings, has lately engrossed so much of public attention in the Western world, and subsequently in the larger towns of this country, has at last been performed among ourselves. A correspondent informs us that he formed one of a party who met on Wednesday evening to witness the table wonder, which was so successfully played off that after the lapse of about 7 minutes, the table began actually to move round, and, increasing in speed, soon acquired such velocity of motion as rendered all present unable to keep pace with it. The modus operandi of this very strange occurrence we are, of course, unable to state, but that the table actually moved, our informant is prepared to vouch. I believe it. I don't not believe in the paranormal. I've had a couple of experiences myself that are hard to explain away, but when it comes to evidence that's widely shared online, I see that as more entertainment than evidence of a thing, I guess. I don't know. I'm empirical in my nature. I need to see it and experience a thing to believe it. So, we'll do another one, shall we? Get a third article on the go. See what we have. We've got the Dundee Evening Telegraph for Tuesday, the 1st of January, 1935. So New Year's Day, 1935. Let's see what this has for us. So this one involves death and the railway lines. I don't know more than that, but that's your warning for this one. It's entitled Dying Man's Dramatic Telephone Message. Told doctor he had been shot. Suspect found dead on railway line. Police discovery during hue and cry. The ringing of the telephone bell in the house of a doctor at Coltishall near Norwich and the sound of a man's voice gasping into the phone that he had been shot were features of the tragic death of an engineer in the district last night. Police officers inquiring into the tragedy later found a youth for whom they were searching lying dead on a railway line. The victim of the tragedy was Mr. William Neville Carpenter, manager of an engineering and boat-building business at Coltishall. The first hint of the tragedy came when Dr. Frank Sugden was called to the telephone in his house. He heard Mr. Carpenter asking him to come quickly as he had been shot. The doctor immediately went to Mr. Carpenter's house and found him lying on the floor. He died shortly afterwards. Dr. Sugden at once informed the police. A hue and cry was raised, and a dramatic development occurred a few hours afterwards, when a decapitated body found on the railway line near Coltishall was identified as that of William Walla, who was 18 years of age, of Coltishall, for whom the police were searching. William Walla's description had been circulated to all police stations in the district. He was stated to be in possession of a pedal cycle. Walla, who was an orphan, had been engaged by the Coltishall yard for some time as a boat-builder's apprentice, but it is understood he ceased to work there about 3 weeks ago. Walla was found to be missing after Mr. Carpenter's death last night. He was a boy with a very good character and well liked in the village. Beside Boatyard. The house where the tragedy occurred is attached to the boat-building yard by the River Bour, where the business is carried on. Mr. Carpenter had lived there for many years with his brother, who is also connected with the business. It is believed that Mr. Carpenter received his injuries in the yard and managed to make his way to the house nearby so that he could telephone to the doctor for assistance. One of the villagers told the reporter that Mr. Carpenter's death had come as a great shock, as he was very popular and respected in the district. During the day, the police had carried out extensive investigations at the house and in the yard and made numerous inquiries at various places in the neighbourhood. That was from the Dundee Evening Telegraph for Tuesday the 1st of January 1935. I'm not sure what gave them the idea that Walla was the murderer, but it's definitely a coincidence that he was found not far from the murder scene, decapitated on the line. So do we think that he was maybe so freaked out after the murder that in his bid to escape, he's maybe just been too distracted to notice a passing train? Because I'm pretty certain I'd put money on it that it was a train decapitated him. I'm not sure how they connected him to the murder in the first place. It doesn't elaborate on that. But there you go. So we had a murder victim and his apparent murderer both dying at the very start on New Year's Day in 1935. So I guess that's one way to end an episode. It's not the happiest way to end an episode, but that is always the possibility in our random newspaper article Lucky Dips. So we may see you for the next one.